Sarah, thanks so much for asking me to do this. Y'all, this is something that I just love to do and I'm so passionate about. Whenever we moved here, oh gosh, it's going on 6 years ago. I will never forget, we were in a meeting for 10,000 Fathers, and Aaron looked over at me and he's like, "Hey, track two's coming up. You're going to lead a visual arts workshop." And I was like, "Oh, okay." And I don't usually lead anything. Usually that's David. And so it took me a little while to get the hang of it, but it's something that I look forward to. Every track two is the visual arts workshop. And so thanks, Jay. Jay, you're going to hear it probably all over again. I hope you don't mind, but it's just something that I think will be a good foundation for everybody when it comes to creativity. And it's so funny whenever people walk into this session, you have a whole bunch of musicians and songwriters walk in and they see this display of paper and watercolors and paints and pencils and markers, and you see this expression of "oh no" come over their face. So that's like my favorite thing, honestly, because most of them think I don't do this is really uncomfortable for me. And I kind of want to say, well, how do you think I feel every time I come into church and have to sing on Sunday, because that's not my strong suit either. But there's different ways to worship. And so the reason that we do this workshop in 10,000 Fathers is just to expose people to, there's not only one way to worship, there's plenty of ways to worship. And so you need to look at the gifts that the Lord has given you and tap into those. And how do you worship through those? So when people come in, or even when I have conversations with people and they say, "Oh, I'm not very creative," I'm like, "No, of course you are. Everyone is creative." And I'll get into that in a minute. But the Lord has created all of us to be creative. And so I just want to encourage y'all and all of that. And I want to thank everybody for coming this morning. And to start off, I'm just going to tell you a story about the first time that I ever decided to worship through a different form, which is through visual arts, which is through painting. So I'm sure the majority of y'all know who David is. David is my husband. And I always had this dream. I'm like, "Oh, I wish I was just this amazing singer who could, we could be like, Brian and Katie Torwald and lead worship together. And it would be amazing." And just such a great time. And y'all, I took voice lessons, like as much as I tried, it just wasn't happening for me. But I can make a joyful noise unto the Lord. I don't make a good one, but it's joyful. And so that's okay. That's okay. So one time David came to me, we were having this worship night at our church, and it was going to be probably, 20 to 30 people. It was on a Monday night. And he said, "Hey, I have this idea. I know that you always, like, I know this is your dream. I know you always want to just be up on stage, worship with me. I don't want to be on stage, but I do want to worship, lead worship with my husband." And he said, "What if you painted while I, played and sang and laid worship? Like, what if you just got on stage, and what if you painted while I did that?" And I was like, "Okay, I can do that, because that's a space that I feel comfortable in. That's a space that I feel like the Lord has always just given me favor in." And so he knew that that would be a comfortable space for me. But at this point, I had two small children, Levi and Zoe. They were very young. They're 16 months apart. I think that Zoe was maybe 18 months or something like that. So very small children. I said, "I don't have time to go get supplies. I don't have time to get anything." He said, "Don't worry about it. I'm going to get everything you need. Just, send me a list of everything you need, and I will set it up for you. You don't have to worry about anything. Just show up." So I said, "Okay, I can do that." And so I showed up, ready for the worship service. And if y'all know David, his motto pretty much is "go big or go home." And my motto is more like, "Why would you go big if you could just go home?" So whenever I come there and there's a huge painting that's like 4 feet tall and 3 feet wide, I look at him and I'm like, "Are you crazy? This is an hour long. How in the world am I supposed to paint this huge painting it's huge. And he's like, oh, you're going to be great. You're going to be great. You're going to do a great job. It'll be fine. And I'm like, oh, okay. He's like, I'm starting. Go ahead and go. And so I start frantically painting on this huge canvas. So during this point of my life as well, like I said, my children were very small. My dad had recently retired from being a pharmacist for, 30 something years. And he just started doing things that weren't making very much sense. And it was very hurtful to me. He would stop showing up. He would stop wanting to hang out with me and my kids. Um, right before this, I think it was one of their birthdays, and he called me and he said, hey, I'm not going to be able to come. And I'm like, oh no, are you okay? And he's like, yeah, I'm just tired. I'm going to take a nap, but I'll come by later. And it was very hurtful to me. And I would bring it up to him and he would be so remorseful, and he'd, start crying. He's like, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I'll try to do better. And he would do better for a few weeks, and then it would just be the same kind of patterns. And so immediately when I start painting, I just start talking to the Lord about it, because I was very angry with my dad. I was very frustrated with him. I felt like he didn't care. And the whole time I was painting, I kept on telling the Lord, asking him, how do you forgive someone who's not sorry? Because if he was sorry, he would stop doing it, or he would change his mind, he would change his actions. I just don't understand how you can forgive someone who's not sorry. I don't think he's sorry. And the whole time, the Lord just kept telling me, I've got it covered. It's okay. I've got it covered. I know what's going on, and you just need to let go, and you need to give him grace, and you need to forgive him. And so it was through that painting during that time that I ended up just walking through forgiveness with my dad. And at the end of it, I stepped back and, I really was just trying to cover the canvas the entire time. And I remember at one point I was really angry, and I just kind of like slashed the canvas like that. And it ended up kind of looking like a halo, and ended up looking like wings and a halo. So Marcus, if you want to put up that slide, and this is the painting that it ended up being at the end. And you see the halo at the top. I slashed it at the beginning, and then I went back and like made a halo out of it, because the Lord, just as soon as I saw it, I remember him saying, I've got it covered. I've got it covered. And it reminded me of the verse in Psalm, like, under his wings, you will take refuge. His feathers will cover you, and under his wings, you'll take refuge. And so in all honesty, y'all, that painting, I do not think, and this is just me, I do not think it's very aesthetically pleasing. It is hung up in my master bedroom, because how many people invite people into your master bedroom whenever they come over. Hey, you want to come look at my master bed? No, nobody does that. But I'm in there every single day, and I see that painting every single day. And when I see it, I don't see something that I'm like, ugh, I don't like that. It's one of my most prized possessions, because I can look at that painting and I can remember the time that the Lord led me through forgiveness with my dad during that point in worship. And fast forward to it was about 4 months later that we found out that my dad, he was diagnosed with Alzheimer's. And so I was so thankful that the Lord was so kind to lead me through that before I had a reason, before I had like a medical thing, like, oh, well, this is why, so I need to forgive him. No, the Lord led me. He was so kind and gracious to lead me through that without me having to have a reason. And so I look at that painting every day, and I'm reminded of that, and that it is possible to forgive someone who you don't think that they're sorry, but it's always possible to let go. And so that was one of my first times ever doing worship through visual arts. It was precious. Not every time's going to be like that, though. It's really not. Sometimes you'll leave and you'll be like, okay, well, that was just a time. And, one day you might know what it means, and one day you'll still be waiting. But I just want to encourage you to do it anyway. And so when it comes to, I want to look at my notes, because I always have to look at my notes, but I want to give y'all some pointers when it comes to doing worship through any kind of creativity, but I usually do visual arts, but anything that y'all were talking about earlier, cooking, dancing, I think all of these apply. And so the first thing is to be open. And it's amazing how many books I've read where it talks about whether they're talking about the Holy Spirit giving inspiration or whether they're talking about, some people are real, kooky out there. And one of my favorite authors is Elizabeth Gilbert, and she talks about how there's little ideas floating around just looking for somebody to make them manifest. And in her book, Big Magic, this is what she says. She says, ideas have no material body, but they do have a consciousness, and they most certainly have will. Ideas are driven by a single impulse to be made manifest. And the only way an idea can be made manifest in our world is through collaboration with a human partner. And it's only through a human's effort that an idea can be escorted out of the ether and into the realm of the actual. Therefore, ideas spend eternity swirling around us, searching for available and willing human partners. So she talks about ideas, and I just say that that's the Holy Spirit. The Holy Spirit is searching for anybody who is willing and open to listening and willing and open to being available, being that vessel to make whatever inspiration, which literally means to breathe into, available to make into the natural world. Does that make sense? And so you have to be open. You have to be open to do that. One of the things that I think stops people, though, is fear. And also Elizabeth Gilbert talks a lot about fear in her book, Big Magic. And she talks about how you have to have the courage to do the things that you're afraid of doing. Sometimes the Holy Spirit asks you to do something that is completely uncomfortable when it comes to creativity. Sometimes the Lord will ask you to dance around. Sometimes the Lord will ask you to draw something that you're like, what is that? I don't even know what that is. But I would just want to encourage you to do it anyway. Like, what do you have to lose? Nobody's watching you. The thing that stops us is fear. And fear is always going to be around. And I'm glad that it is. If it's not, then you would just walk into traffic and, get hit by a bus. Everybody has fear for a reason. The thing when it comes to creativity, though, is that you need to let fear know that it's there, but don't let it guide you. Let the Holy Spirit guide you. Say, okay, fear, I acknowledge that you're here, but you need to give it clear instructions that you won't be taking any advice from it that day. Like, it can be along for the ride, but that's all. And I love that. It's all about being vulnerable. So also, Madeleine L'Engle, she wrote A Wrinkle in Time, and she wrote another book called Walking in Water, and it's all about creativity. And I absolutely love what she says when it comes to being open about creativity. This is her quote. She says, "The artist is a serpent who is willing to be a birth giver. In a very real sense, the artist, male or female, should be like Mary, who, when the angel told her that she was to bear the Messiah, was obedient to the command. I believe that each work of art, whether it is a work of great genius or something small, comes to the artist and says, 'Here I am, enflesh me, give birth to me.' And the artist either says, 'My soul doth magnify the Lord,' and willingly becomes the bearer of the work, or refuses. But the obedient response is not necessarily the conscious one, and not everyone has the humble, courageous obedience of Mary." And I love that, because Mary could have been like, "Oh, I don't know about that." I mean, the Lord still probably would have done it, but what a gift that Mary can be who we want to be, that she can just be that guide for us and say, yeah, of course, my soul doth magnify the Lord. Here I will do whatever you ask of me. I'm completely open. My hands are open to you. And I love that. And so when it comes to vulnerability, the next thing is to be vulnerable. So if any of y'all know me, you know that I'm probably the biggest fangirl of Brene Brown ever. She's a researcher, and she does a lot of research on shame and vulnerability, which sounds like something that why would you even want to know about those things? But it has helped me so incredibly much. All of her work has helped me. But she defines vulnerability as uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure. And one of her favorite things to ask people whenever she interviews people for her research is this question. She says, can you give me an example of courage that you've seen in your life or you yourself have engaged in, any act of bravery at all that was not completely defined by vulnerability? So she asked this question to CEOs, Navy SEALs, NFL players, whoever, and not one person has ever been able to tell her any example of courage that wasn't defined by vulnerability. You have to put yourself out there if you want to be brave at all. So don't you think it's so interesting that we're all taught growing up, be brave, be brave, be brave. Oh, but don't ever be vulnerable. Y'all, it's not possible. You cannot be brave without being vulnerable. And so if you're not going to put it out there whenever you're doing creativity, then what's the point? How are you going to be brave if you're not vulnerable? And I love that so much. She also says that vulnerability, through her research, she found out that vulnerability is the birthplace of love, belonging, joy, courage, empathy, and creativity. So if it's the birthplace of all of those things, why are we so scared of it all the time? It really, really makes you think, especially when it comes to putting yourself out there. Why would we want to give up love or belonging or joy or courage or empathy or creativity? Why would we want to give those things up just to like look like you're a little bit braver than what you really are when it's not really true? So I love that. So if it's the birthplace of creativity, my last thing is to, well, not my last thing, but my third thing is to be creative. So in Genesis 1:27, so God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. I find it so interesting that the author of Genesis did this verse and he used the word create 3 times. He wanted to make it very clear that we were created in God's own image and that God created us. He made it clear 3 different times. And I don't think that that's a mess up. I really don't. I think that it's because, oh, if we were created in the image of God and he's the most creative being in the universe, in the whole world, how could we ever think that we're not creative beings? It's just not possible. And so when anybody says that they're not creative, I'm like, oh, no, you're definitely creative. You're created in the image of God and he's the most creative person ever. So you can't say that. There's no basis for it. So yeah, Brene Brown, again, you know, I'm her fangirl. She says saying I'm not creative doesn't work. There's no such thing as creative people and non-creative people. There are only people who use their creativity and people who don't. And this is what I find super interesting. And she found this in her research. She says, unused creativity doesn't disappear. It lives within us until it's either expressed, neglected to death, or suffocated by resentment and fear. And so guys, if you don't get that creativity out, then why would you want that to happen to it? Why would you want it to be neglected to death or suffocated by resentment and fear? Why would you want to be led by those things? So just let go and let it happen. And she also says the only unique contribution you will ever make in this world is to be born of our creativity. Like everything that you will ever give in this world that's going to be creative will come free from you. Does that make sense? Go back one more slide, Marcus. I think I skipped over something. Julia Cameron, The Artist's Way. Yes. So she talks about God being the ultimate creator, and she says, those who speak in spiritual terms routinely refer to God as the creator, but seldom see creator as the literal term for artist. I'm suggesting that you take the term creator quite literally. You are seeking to forge a creative alliance, artist to artist, with the great creator. Accepting this concept can greatly expand your creative possibilities. And so she just touches on the fact that yeah, we were created by the ultimate creator, and to form an alliance with him it's an honor. It's an honor that that the Holy Spirit would seek you out to do that. And I love that so much. I love Julie Cameron. She wrote a book called The Artist's Way, and she gives a whole bunch of a whole bunch of pointers. If you ever want to read that book, I really, really encourage it. Okay, what is next? The last thing. What is the last thing? Do it for the process. Yes. Okay, so what I was saying earlier about how sometimes you will know what you've just done when it comes to creativity, and sometimes you won't know. I encourage you that no matter the outcome, do it for the process. So you can look at the story that I told you at the beginning. I did that mainly for the process. Another story that I want to tell you is that on Mother's Day a few years ago, David knew that we had just moved into this house, and I wanted to paint, ironically enough, a very large painting that was 4 feet by 3 feet to put in our main room that would be kind of a banner over our house. I kept asking the Lord, when people come into our house, what do you want them to feel? What do you want them to know about where this is? What do you want to name this? And so I kept on hearing the phrase from him, still waters. I want it to be a place of refuge. I want it to be a place of rest and healing and restoration. And so I knew that what I was supposed to paint was supposed to be still waters. And so on Mother's Day, David knew we had moved in at the very end of February, beginning of March, and David knew that I had been wanting to paint this painting. And so on Mother's Day that year, he said, hey, for Mother's Day, I'm going to take all of the kids to church and you can stay and paint. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's the best Mother's Day present ever. And so I brought my huge canvas out on the back deck, and I turned on, I looked up on, there's so many songs ironically called Still Waters. So I just looked up all the songs called Still Waters. I'm like, I'm going to play these songs. I'm going to paint this, huge banner for our house. And so I started going, and y'all, I immediately was just drawn to tears. So this is what I ended up with that day. And the whole time I was just crying because it was Mother's Day. And because the song that I was listening to, it talked a lot about heartache. And I had a friend at the time who had been trying to have babies for like over 7 years. And I was just heartbroken for her. And I was just, sobbing, crying the entire time I'm painting this. And so David comes home with the kids, and he walks out on the deck and he sees these, and I'm like, my face is probably so puffy because I had been crying the entire time. And he comes out and he looks at it, and I'm like, and I tell him the story and everything, and he just kind of looks at it. And David is my biggest fan. And so when he kind of stares at it for a minute, and he's like, it's really pretty. It doesn't look like still waters. It looks like a raging sea. And so, like, if you can tell, like, even in the close-up, do you see how there's like drippings? And I was like, those are representative of my tears. And like, look at all and he's like, yeah, it just looks really rough. And I got it. And I knew that it didn't look like still waters. And so the kids were back though, so I couldn't do anything about it then. So I had already like hung up the canvas where it was supposed to go. So I just hung it up there so the kids couldn't reach it. And so for a week, I just walked back and forth. And every time I saw that, I'd be like, oh, I don't like that. I don't like that. I love what happened during it because it was so impactful for me, but I do not like that painting. It's not what it's supposed to be. And so about a week goes by, and I'm laying in bed one night, and I'm just talking to the Lord, and I'm like, Lord, why is this bothering me so badly? Why is this painting why does it irk me so? Like, why is it messing with me? I said, I know it's not still waters, but I know you want still waters. So what is still waters? And immediately he brings to my mind a picture that David had sent me of the Sea of Galilee, that he had gone to Israel the November before, and he had sent me this beautiful picture of the Sea of Galilee. And I was like, oh my goodness, that's what I'm supposed to paint. I'm supposed to paint the Sea of Galilee. And so the next day, I got my kids all off to school and preschool and all of the places, and it was raining that day, but I knew that I had to do it because I just had to do it. It was killing me. I couldn't walk by that painting one more time. And so I put it up in my garage, and so I started painting. And so I just decided to paint over it. And so I started painting over it. And halfway through, I started to understand why the Lord had me paint the raging waters is because he can always calm it, guys. He can always paint over it. He can always cover it all with his still waters, and he can calm the waves with just a word. And so again, I'm sobbing all over again in my garage because now every time I look at that painting, I can remember what the process was. I can remember the steps, and I can remember that painting is not just a painting. That painting is a process, and that painting represents each person who comes into my life, because you know what? I don't know about y'all, but I'm not still waters. I've got a whole bunch of stuff underneath me, but the Lord has healed so many things in me just by speaking words and speaking peace. And that doesn't mean it's not under there. You can still see the scars underneath it, even with everything painted. Marcus, you can show the end result too. Even with everything painted, if you look up close to that painting, you can still see the drips. You can still see the slashes of the heaviness, the heavy paint. But I love that from far away, it brings me peace. And so I can't tell you how many people have come into my house and have looked at that painting and said, oh, what is that? What is it? Tell me about it. And I get to tell people that story every time. And I can't tell you how many people would start to tear up and just start crying because they're like, oh my gosh, as soon as I walked into your house, that's what I felt like. And so do it for the process. The end result is fine. I like that painting. I don't love it, but I get to tell people that story, and it gets to change lives. And that's what it's about. So the process counts way more than the end result. Don't be scared about the end result. It could be awful, but what the Lord led you through in that process is great. There's also times where I paint things sitting next to my kid because they want to paint, and I'm not about to leave them alone with the paints yet. And I'll paint something, and I'm like, oh, that's pretty. And I'll just put it up on the refrigerator or put it up on our bulletin board. And people have walked into my room and said, oh, why did you paint that? And I'm like, oh, I was just sitting next to we were just painting. We were having fun. They're like, it's so weird. I had a dream and I saw that in my dream. And I don't know why it's here. I don't know, and I'm like, oh. And so I'll say, well, what does it mean to you? And they'll just start telling me what it means to them. And I'll be like, well, this is for you then. I have no special hold on to it or whatever. This is for you. Take this with you. And so just be obedient, guys. Be open, be vulnerable, even whenever you're just sitting there doodling. Be open and listen. What do you want to paint? What do you want to draw? What do you want to dance? What do you want to cook? Just be open and be vulnerable. Do it. Let fear in, but say, you're not going to guide me. The Holy Spirit is. And just be creative. And whenever I do the visual arts workshop with the worship school, I always tell them before you start, if this interests you, and if you want to have something to do after this, what we normally do is I'll have, you can get whatever art supplies that you have. So if you have watercolors, get watercolors. If you have colored pencils, crayons, whatever, but get a piece of paper. And on the back of that piece of paper, or the front, you can't tell what it is yet because you haven't done anything yet, but just start to write Julia Cameron talks about morning pages, and she talks about just starting to write, and just, it's a stream of consciousness. And even if you don't really have anything to write about, just say, I've got to go to the grocery store today because we're out of yogurt and apples. And why do we love apples? I love apples and so just keep on going, whatever the stream of consciousness it is. And she talks about the reason that she does that is to get all of the junk out of the way, because you need a place that's free and clear, and it's away from, she calls it the censor's babble, the devil's evil whispering in your ear. You're not good enough for this. And if you hear that, write it down. I don't feel like I'm good enough for this. I feel like this is going to be a disaster. I'm going to throw it away in the end. Write it down, because you know what? That gets it out of the way. And then you can work from a place of peace, and you can work from a place of being open, and you can work from a place of not letting fear control you anymore, because you've already said the lie that you believe. You've already gotten it out of the way. So I tell people, just take 3 to 5 minutes and just write a stream of consciousness. Just start writing on that paper, and you might hear ugly lies, and you might hear incredibly beautiful truths that are going to lead you into what you want to paint on the other side. So after that, I would just turn on worship music, and then I let people go, and I say, okay, paint. Maybe it's a word that the Lord has given you. Maybe you want to write that word, and then maybe you want to add to it. Maybe it's a picture, and maybe you want to draw as best as you can that picture that you see in your mind, and then you want to add to it. Maybe it's just colors. Maybe the Lord wants to speak to you through colors, because even colors mean things. But just go. There's no right or wrong way to do it. And so that's what I normally do in visual arts workshop. And then we get together and we share. And I can't tell you how many times I used to not make everybody share, but now I make everybody share, because I've seen how much good it can do. And I can't tell you how many times one person has gotten up and said, I don't really know what this is. And the other person across the room, like, well, I do. That's for me. Like, that's what you painted is for me. The Lord shows up every single time. And even if you might not know it right then, days can pass, weeks can pass, years can pass. And somebody can walk into your house and see something on your kitchen, on your kitchen refrigerator, and say, why did you paint that? There's always going to be enlightenment at the end. The Lord will always show you in the end why you've done something, even if it's quite some time later. So that's one thing you can do, is you can paint or draw or do whatever. Another thing that we did in our class that everybody really, really loved is we made a collage. And what you do for that is you just go through magazines and you pick out images that pop out at you. You might not know why they pop out at you, but you know that they do. You tear out those images, and then you start to paste them on your page in an aesthetically pleasing way. Like I said, there's no right or wrong way to do it. Sometimes it's words that pop out at you. What is this word? Why is this word speaking to me right now? And you put it on a page. And we did this because whenever we did the Made to Create, it was the beginning of the year. And so I said, okay, this is our inspiration mood board for the year. We're going to put this somewhere that we can see every single day. And then by the end of the year, we're going to look at it and be like, I cannot believe how many things came to fruition. How many of these things that just jumped out at me for some reason. It made me more aware to look and see. It made me more motivated to do things. And it made me see Jesus in places that I normally wouldn't have even looked at them in. And so that's another fun thing that you can do that everybody really, really loved. And I put mine's hanging up in my master bathroom, because how many people do you invite to your master bathroom every day whenever they come to visit? Not me, but I see it every single day. I have friends who put it in their closet. And even if you don't want to hang it up, put it at the top of your underwear drawer. Like, put it somewhere that you can see every single day and be motivated and be inspired with what the Lord wants to do. You could even have it around a certain thing, like maybe this quarantine season. Maybe you want, like, what does the Lord want to show me during this season? And that could be your inspiration mood board. What this summer, maybe, just things that you want to see throughout your life. It can be whatever you want it to be, but people really, really enjoy doing that as well. And if you're kind of like on the fence and you're like, I really am not comfortable enough getting out the paints and the crayons or whatever, I want to one day, but this is like a good starting point. It's an easy starting point. It's already made for you. All you gotta do is cut it out. Everybody knows how to cut things out and paste things down on a piece of paper, and it still has the same effect. It can inspire you, and the Lord can totally speak to you through that. So that's what I have to say about creativity. I hope that y'all gain from it. Does anybody have any questions at all that I could maybe clarify or answer, or do you need any ideas for anything like that?
Yeah, I'll ask a question. So if anybody else has questions, put them in the chat box for us. Lauren, what's your favorite medium to work with painting wise?
Painting wise, the easiest access and the easiest cleanup is probably watercolor. Just because all you need is a palette and some water and, maybe a paper towel or something like that. It's the easiest to set up and clean up. I love oils, but that's the hardest. And with children that are very young, I don't trust to leave those out. You can leave those out, but they just get everywhere. And then acrylics is like, if I'm like, oh, I have a big canvas to paint, most of the time I'll just pull out the acrylics because they dry really fast. And it's an easy cleanup too. Oils, you have to use paint thinners and other oils to thin out the oil, which is weird, but yeah. So I like to paint mostly. I used to like to draw a lot, but that takes a long time. And I don't have a lot of, time
Extra
on it.
time.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so we got some good questions here coming in. How do you switch into the creative mode?
Oh gosh. Guys, it's hard to a lot of times. I don't know about y'all, but I can't, and this is, maybe I should ask Jesus about this, but I can't really feel okay creating if the space around me is in disarray. And the space around me is in disarray the majority of the time. So I'll do things like, okay, I'll just clean the kitchen. And as long as my kitchen is clean, I can sit down. And a lot of times, like, my kids see me paint and do stuff and they know now, let's just let mom do her thing. But sometimes they sit down and they paint with me. My daughter Zoe loves to paint. She probably honestly paints more than I do. But to answer your question, to find the space, even if I don't have the space, a lot of times I took out my AirPod. I have one AirPod in until it goes dead, and then I'll put that back in the case, and I'll put the other AirPod in, and I'll just put on worship music, because sometimes that's the only time I get. And as long as I'm having something like that in my head, I can create a beautiful space in my home by doing the dishes. Or I can create, oh my gosh, I painted my doors this week, the inside of my doors, because I was tired of looking at white doors. And so I painted one of them black and one of them a teal color, kind of the color behind you, Sarah, because I needed some joy. And look at you, door twins. I love it. and it created such a sense of joy, not only to me, but just precious moments, even with like my kids. My youngest one is 3, and even she knows not to touch paint. But she was just brought up, no, not to touch. So she walked up, while I was painting the door teal, and I was like, hey, and she looked at me, she's like, I'm not going to touch it. She's like, it's just, and she like put her hand, she's like, it's just so much beautiful. It's so much beautiful, mommy. And I'm like, oh, that was worth it. Because then 5 minutes later, my 11-year-old walked up and he was like, oh, what'd you do? So you get the full spectrum of it all. But you know what? That was still a time of worship for me because I had the music in my ear and I was doing something creative that brought joy. So to me, that's worshipful. That's how I find time. I have to make it. And I have to know that whatever I do is an act of worship.
Yeah, and it's creating beauty, which
Yeah.
is, yeah, that's all part of who God is, creating beauty, I think, too.
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay. Dana has a question for you. Do you recognize creative strengths in your children? So you mentioned Zoe loves to paint.
Yeah, Zoe loves to paint. That's what she's been doing most of the quarantine. And, I just had to go buy her another pack of canvases. She loves to paint. Levi, Levi is very good at video games. Like, he's incredibly good at video games, which I do think that that's creative because you have to build a lot of worlds and everything. But you know what? I've noticed in him just in the past week of doing digital learning days, they have this thing with music where they have to go in and they have to make a song in this website. And he has created the most fun little jingles. And he's been so proud of himself and so into it. And I'm like, well, look at there. He might have a little bit of music in him. And Milo, he walks around. We have this, they don't make it anymore, but it's like this Amazon Tap, which is like an Alexa that you can just walk around with. It's like a portable Alexa. And he just walks around with music all day long. And Edith, she's going to be my dancer. Anytime music comes on, it's just, very theatrical and very, very dancey. So yeah.
That's awesome. All right. Another question. Any tips for introducing children to painting, school-age children?
School-age children, yes. So watercolors are always fun and easy, and they don't get too messy. Another idea is tempera paint, and it's a water-based paint that's also very easy to clean up. And I think that they actually have, I don't have any of these, but I just saw somebody post about them. They're tempera sticks, painting sticks for people that you can buy on Amazon. And I'm really interested in getting some of those because I think that my younger kids will really, really like it. But also, if you have really, really young kids, Melissa and Doug have these little pads that just use water, and you just put the water on things, and then it like makes it, it uncovers something magical happens, and the colors shine through, and they think that they've painted it, and it's amazing. But then when it dries, the colors go away and it's white again. So when Edith tells me that she wants, what is she calls it? Colorful, colorful cups. Colorful cups is what she calls it because it's just a water. And she was like, I want the colorful cups. I want the colorful cups. And that's what it's called in her 3-year-old language. She wants to do that. So those are really fun too for kids.
That's awesome. For people who are watching the recording, they can't see the chat that's going on, but yeah, Meredith is chiming in on the painting sticks that they're awesome and dry immediately. So
Okay. I want to get some.
yeah,
Thanks,
yeah.
Meredith.
And then Dana's reminding us that earlier Lisa had mentioned that she and her daughter are painting rocks. And on one of my prayer walks that I went on, I noticed that people had been painting rocks and placing them, on the sidewalks or around the park. So that's a fun thing to do during quarantine too, to
It's so
spread a
fun. It
little
brings
joy that
such
way.
joy. Yes, it's because
Yeah.
also, if you know me, I recently read a book last year called Joyful, and it talks about all the aesthetics of joy. And one of them is surprise. And so people always love a good surprise and a big, fun, colorful surprise that you're not expecting on a walk. I think that painting rocks is so fun. What a fun
Yes.
surprise to find, especially during a time like this. I think that's a great idea.
Yeah, it was funny. I was walking and I saw a rock on the ground and it said smile, and I did. Like it just, just like you're saying, it
Yeah.
just is that surprise and it just naturally happened. Great. Let me read a couple more of these. I paint alongside my 3-year-old on canvas. Like Lauren said, it's all about the process to just create with her. And then the end
Mhm.
result is such a cool reminder of our time creating together. Yeah, that's awesome. And then I think Meredith was talking again about having worship music on in the background and just allowing the Lord to speak to you that way.
Mhm.
Yeah, Dana's talking about Blakely had a rock garden collection when she was little. Okay,
Aw.
and then Meredith also says there's a great book called Drawing with Children by Mona Brooks, and she incorporates drawing and using different mediums to add with color. So
Oh,
awesome.
fun.
Good
I'll check that out.
resources.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, oh, and it's great for adults too.
Oh,
Absolutely. I
yeah.
know. I think I love what you say, Lauren, about welcoming in fear, like not ignoring it,
Mhm.
not acting like it's not there, but just not allowing it to dictate what's going to happen. Instead,
Mhm.
to I guess tell fear that the Holy Spirit is going to be the
Yeah.
leader.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. All right. Well, thank you so much. This has been. I'm going to go get my watercolors out now.
Oh, good, good.
I
Well, if
am.
anybody does
Yeah.
anything, please figure out a way to let me see it. It's literally my favorite part of,
Mm,
getting together with people afterwards and doing it, because we had our recent track two here. Well, it wasn't here. We had to do it virtually. So I had to awkwardly record that entire talk without having anybody in front of me and send it to them, and then they had to do their thing, and then we all got together like this and
mm,
shared all the pieces. And y'all, it's so encouraging. It really is. And it's funny, a lot of the tracks, they're going through the journeys together. It's so interesting to see the same theme, and they weren't anywhere
mm.
near each other. Like this past time, I would say probably at least 50% of people had a mountain in their painting. And it
Wow.
was really interesting because you just know that the Lord is so there and in charge, especially because they were completely in different areas of the world doing this. And then whenever they shared for the first time, all of them were like, I'm seeing a theme, seeing a theme, I'm seeing a theme. And so it's just really, really cool. So if y'all do something, please figure out a way to share it with me, and talk to me about it, because I like it just gets me so excited. I'm sorry. I know I'm so but I just love it so much.
Well, and I love what you're saying too about sometimes it's not for us, but we hear
Yes.
something from the Lord that's for somebody else. So
Yes. And
people are chiming in over
yeah.
here. I'm sure you can see it, Lauren, but they're saying, Lauren needs to do a painting workshop.
Oh my God. Oh my gosh. I don't know about
So,
that. I don't know about that. I thought about doing an actual project here, and I was like,
yeah.
"Well, let's just start with what I know." So maybe in the future we can do that. I really would love to do that. And there's lots of little projects that are easy to do also. But yeah, just share, because your story and what the Lord brought you through, it could totally bless somebody else. So even if you can't find a way to share it with me, share it with somebody if you feel comfortable, and if you think that maybe this is for somebody, because I guarantee you that the Lord will bless you, will bless that in some way. Either he'll bless you or he'll bless somebody else. So I just love
Yeah.
it.